By late December 1944, Bastogne was surrounded. 10,000 American soldiers from the 101st Airborne, the 10th Armored Division, and supporting units were trapped inside the small Belgian town. German artillery pounded their positions day and night. Food was running out. Ammunition was scarce. The men huddled in basements, barns, and half-destroyed houses, trying to keep warm. The temperature dropped to nearly -20 degrees Celsius. Frostbite spread quickly. The wounded froze to death before medics could reach them. Even the bandages stiffened like cardboard in the cold. Yet, despite everything, the Americans held the line. Corporal James P. W. Martin of the 101st Airborne later recalled, "We were surrounded, short on everything, and freezing, but nobody talked about surrender. We were too damn stubborn." While soldiers fought and froze, the people of Bastogne suffered quietly. Families hid in cellars, surviving on scraps of bread and melted snow. Many risked their lives to help the wounded Americans. A Belgian nurse named Renée Lamer. She treated dozens of soldiers in a makeshift hospital until Christmas Eve, when a German bomb struck the building. Renée was killed instantly. In his journal, an American medic wrote, "She saved more lives than we could count. She died doing what none of us will ever forget." Her story became a symbol of courage amid horror. 4 days, the fog hung low and thick. The Allies couldn't send planes for supplies or airstrikes. The only lifeline was the narrow, icy roads still under enemy fire. Then, on December 23rd, the skies cleared. The first sound the soldiers heard that morning wasn't the artillery. It was the distant hum of engines. Hundreds of American C-47 transport planes appeared overhead, dropping food, ammunition, and medical supplies by parachute. The men in Bastogne cheered, waving their helmets and rifles in the air. Private Donald Burgett remembered, "It felt like Christmas came from the sky. We were starving, freezing, and suddenly there was hope again." The weather that had once protected the Germans now turned against them. Back in his headquarters in the Eifel Mountains, Adolf Hitler was convinced the offensive would still succeed. He believed his troops would capture Bastogne and march straight to the River Meuse. But the reality on the ground was collapsing. The German supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. Fuel trucks couldn't keep up. Every lost tank was irreplaceable. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg, warned Hitler, "This offensive is doomed. We do not have the strength, nor the fuel." But Hitler refused to listen. He ordered his commanders to keep pushing, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, his best armored divisions, the 1st SS Panzer and the 2nd Panzer, were running on fumes. Among the German spearheads was SS Colonel Joachim Peiper, leading a column of tanks and infantry through the Ardennes. Known for his ruthless efficiency, Peiper's mission was to capture key bridges and advance toward the Meuse River. But on December 17th, near the Belgian town of Malmedy, his men captured over 100 American prisoners. Instead of sending them to the rear, the SS troops opened fire. 84 unarmed Americans were murdered in the snow. When the massacre became known, it ignited outrage across the Allied lines. The phrase, "Remember Malmedy," became a battle cry. From that point on, American soldiers fought with a hardened resolve. This was no longer just a battle, but a fight for justice. While Bastogne held its ground, General George S. Patton was on the move. He had promised Eisenhower that he would turn his entire Third Army north within 48 hours, a nearly impossible task in the snow-choked roads of Belgium. But Patton's men did the impossible. They marched day and night through sleet and ice, their tanks sliding across frozen roads. By December 26th, they reached the outskirts at around 4:50 p.m. Elements of the 37th Tank Battalion broke through the German lines and entered the town. An officer greeted the weary paratroopers with the words, "Merry Christmas." For the soldiers of Bastogne, it was the greatest gift imaginable. They were free. With Bastogne relieved, the German advance began to collapse. Their momentum was gone. Their tanks stood empty, engines silent, as fuel ran dry. The Allies now had control of the air again, and every German movement was bombed relentlessly. By the final days of December, it was clear Hitler's gamble had failed. But the fighting was far from over. Even as the German offensive faltered, some of the fiercest battles of the campaign were still to come. The Americans were determined to push the enemy back, to erase the Bulge from the map. The Battle of the Bulge was not only a military conflict, it was a human tragedy. Entire towns were destroyed. Thousands of civilians lost their homes. A Belgian farmer named Henry Bastien wrote after the war, "We had no power, no food, no safety. The sky burned at night, and the ground shook with the guns. When the battle was over, nothing was left but ruins and silence." For soldiers, the scars ran even deeper. Many who survived Bastogne spoke little of it afterward. One veteran later said, "We didn't win because we were brave. We won because we refused to die." As the new year approached, both armies were exhausted. German troops began retreating. A German officer's final diary entry, found near the front, read, "The Führer said victory was certain, but the snow has swallowed us. We fight ghosts in the fog. We are finished." On the Allied side, soldiers finally began to believe the end of the war was near, but at a terrible cost. Private Robert Warren of the 101st wrote home on January 1st, 1945. "I made it through the worst winter of my life. We're still here, but many of my friends are not. I'll never forget their faces in the snow." Strategically, the Battle of the Bulge changed everything. The Germans lost over 100,000 men, soldiers, tanks, and aircraft they could never replace. The Allies suffered around 80,000 casualties, but they had the manpower and resources to recover. Most importantly, the battle proved that the German army was no longer invincible. The myth of Nazi strength was shattered in the frozen forests of Belgium. As January 1945 began, the snow began to thaw, revealing the true horror beneath entire fields of destroyed tanks, burnt vehicles, and fallen soldiers. In Bastogne, the streets were littered with wreckage. Children emerged from cellars, blinking in the pale sunlight, searching for family members who hadn't survived. The war was not yet over, but the tide had finally turned for good. In just 6 weeks, the Battle of the Bulge became the largest and bloodiest fight ever fought by the U.S. Army. It was a clash of courage, chaos, and endurance. A battle fought not only against the enemy, but against nature itself. The soldiers who stood their ground in Bastogne, who froze in the forests, and fought through the fog, became part of a legend. Ordinary men who faced impossible odds and refused to yield. As one survivor later said, "It wasn't about winning medals. It was about holding the line, because if we broke, everything behind us would fall." The winter inferno was ending, but one final chapter remained: the counterattack, the collapse of the German dream, and the dawn of victory. By the end of December 1944, the German advance had lost momentum. Fuel shortages immobilized tanks, artillery ran low on shells, and soldiers were exhausted and starving. The very weather that had concealed their attack now betrayed them. Snow began to melt, revealing the devastation and exposing German positions to Allied aircraft. Lieutenant Hans Weber, a German officer, wrote in his journal, "We were promised glory, but all I see is mud, snow, and death. Every day feels like the last." The Allied advance reclaimed towns lost during the offensive. Clairvaux, Wiltz, and Saint-Vith, once overrun by German forces, were now back in Allied hands. Civilians emerged cautiously from hiding, witnessing the wreckage of their homes and streets. In the town of Stavlet, an American soldier recalled, "Houses were shattered. Snow was stained with blood, but the people cheered us as we passed. They hadn't seen hope in weeks." Each liberated town was a step closer to crushing the German offensive entirely. The ultimate objective of Hitler's offensive was the Meuse River. If German forces could reach it, they could split the Allies and potentially force negotiations. But now, the Allies were closing in, cutting off German supply lines and isolating their troops. German units, once confident and aggressive, now retreated under pressure. Corporal Franz Dietrich wrote in his diary, "We run from one village to the next. Every road is blocked, every bridge destroyed. The dream of victory is gone." The battle that had begun as a German blitzkrieg was transforming into a desperate retreat. Even as the battle turned, Acts of courage continued on both sides. American medics risked their lives to retrieve wounded soldiers under fire. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole, later awarded the Medal of Honor, led charges against fortified German positions despite heavy casualties. Soldiers on the German side also displayed courage under impossible circumstances. Obergefreiter Karl Müller wrote, "We fight because we must, not because we believe in victory. Every day we live feels like a miracle." The Battle of the Bulge was as much about endurance as it was about strategy. By early January 1945, German forces were in full retreat. The Bulge on the Allied front line began shrinking as American and British forces reclaimed territory. Tanks, trucks, and artillery abandoned in the snow were left for the Allies to capture or destroy. The morale of the German army was shattered. Hitler's hope for a decisive victory had evaporated, like the snow under the winter sun. A captured German officer reported, "We have fought as long as we can. There is nothing left to give. We are finished." The Battle of the Bulge was over by January 25, 1945. After 6 weeks of brutal fighting, casualties were staggering. Americans, approximately 80,000, including 19,000 killed. Germans, over 100,000, including 15,000 killed. The Ardennes forests were littered with wrecked tanks, destroyed villages, and frozen bodies. Civilian populations had endured unimaginable suffering. Homes destroyed, families displaced, and lives forever altered. General Dwight D. Eisenhower reflected on the battle. "We faced the enemy at his best and emerged victorious. But the cost was high. The courage and sacrifice of our soldiers will never be forgotten." The Battle of the Bulge was not just a strategic victory, it was a testament to human endurance. Private First Class John O'Neill wrote in his diary, "I never thought I'd see my family again. But every morning I woke up, I fought, because if I gave up, there would be no tomorrow." German soldiers, too often recognized the futility of the fight. But many continued to battle in harsh conditions until the very end. The war in Europe was far from over, but the Ardennes had claimed its place in history as one of the most intense and defining conflicts of World War II. Following the Bulge, the Allies continued their advance into Germany. By March 1945, Allied forces had crossed the Rhine River, and the fall of Nazi Germany became inevitable. The courage, sacrifice, and resilience shown during those 6 weeks in the Ardennes became legendary. Bastogne, Malmedy, Clairboch's names forever etched in the memory of those who lived through it. The Battle of the Bulge was a collision of strategy, desperation, and survival. It was Hitler's last gamble, a battle meant to reverse the tide of war. Instead, it revealed the strength of the Allied forces and the limits of the German military. For every soldier, there was a story of courage, fear, and endurance. For every town, a story of destruction and hope. And for history, the lesson was clear. Even the most cunning plans cannot overcome courage, determination, and the will to survive. Private Robert Warren, who survived Bastogne, reflected decades later, "We were ordinary men thrown into extraordinary circumstances. But we stood, we fought, and we survived. That's all anyone can ask for." And so, the Battle of the Bulge came to an end. A final, desperate gamble that failed, but forever marked the courage and resilience of those who fought. Thank you for joining us on Cipher, where history meets mystery. If you want to explore more untold stories, extraordinary battles, and the secrets of the past, subscribe to the channel and step deeper into the world of knowledge and intrigue.